The sterile smell of the hospital room lingers as I look at the DNR form, her name boldly signed at the bottom. Still, I don't react. Just my fingers curling tighter around the sheet. The beeping of machines fills the silence, but it's her betrayal that echoes louder. While I lie there, helpless, the realization hits. She never asked me. That's when I make my decision. My daughter may have signed my life away, but she won't get a piece of what's mine. I'll sign "Do Not Inherit" instead. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Elaine's head ached. The sterile smell of the hospital room was sharp in her nostrils, mingling with the faint hum of machines that kept her tethered to a reality she couldn't fully grasp. She blinked slowly, her vision unfocused, her mind sluggish as though fighting its way through thick fog. For a moment she wondered if she was still dreaming. Then the voices pierced through her haze. "Just finish the damn paperwork." Laura's voice cut through the quiet, sharp with irritation. Elaine's pulse quickened, a knot forming in her stomach. The words weren't unusual. They were Laura's voice in its most familiar form. Impatient, transactional, always rushing toward the next thing. But something about them, something about the tone, made the air in the room feel suddenly colder. Elaine tried to shift, to move, but her body felt like it was made of lead. She could feel the thin sheets beneath her, the coldness of the sterile hospital gown against her skin. She wanted to sit up, to speak, but the grogginess weighed her down. Instead, she kept her eyes closed, trying to focus on the conversation playing out at the foot of her bed. The nurse's voice was calm, measured, but there was an undercurrent of concern that Elaine didn't miss. "I just need your mother's signature here on the DNR form and we'll be done. You know, for her own peace of mind." DNR. Elaine froze. Her heart stuttered. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. DNR? She had never agreed to a DNR. Never once had she consented to such a thing, had never even discussed it with anyone, least of all, with Laura. Her breath quickened, and the dizzying fog seemed to clear just enough for her to grasp the full weight of the moment. She hadn't been consulted, hadn't been asked. Laura had just taken it upon herself to make that decision, to make it for her. She wanted to speak, to shout, to demand an explanation. But the words stuck in her throat. The weight of the decision, the depth of the violation, locked her in place. It was as though time had stalled, as though she were frozen, watching her life being signed away from the outside, unable to stop it. Tom's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts, quieter now, his tone soft and pleading. "Laura, just let the nurse finish, okay? Please, calm down." His words were always like this, passive and resigned, as if he were constantly trying to smooth things over, to avoid confrontation. But Elaine heard the tremor in his voice, the uncertainty he tried to hide behind his calm facade. He didn't want to argue with Laura, never did. It was easier to keep quiet, easier to let her take charge. Elaine had always known that about him, always known how little fight he had left in him after all these years. Then she heard a softer voice, one that made her heart skip. "Riley." "Grandma?" Riley whispered, her voice tentative, as though unsure if she should disturb the fragile silence. "You're awake." Elaine felt a faint squeeze on her hand, warm and familiar. Riley's fingers, slender but strong, brushed against her skin, and Elaine tried to summon the strength to open her eyes. She could hear the confusion, the worry in Riley's voice. "You didn't agree to that, did you?" Riley asked, her tone urgent but soft, as if she, too, feared breaking something fragile in the air. Elaine's breath caught in her chest, and her eyes fluttered open just enough to catch the worried glance Riley shot toward her. The girl's face was a mixture of concern and quiet alarm, but there was something else, too. something that Elaine couldn't quite place, an undercurrent of understanding, of knowing that wasn't there before. Elaine remained still, her mouth dry, her voice trapped behind an invisible wall. She knew Riley was trying to reach her, trying to pull her into the conversation. But the words, the emotions, they felt too large, too heavy to untangle in that moment. Instead, she chose silence. She stayed quiet, letting the room settle into its uneasy rhythm, her gaze drifting between Laura, who was still talking to the nurse, and Riley, who waited for a response that Elaine couldn't give. The space between them felt impossibly vast, like a chasm that she couldn't cross. Her mind raced, though her body was still. Did I hear that right? Did she really sign that form without asking me? Without even consulting me? She wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, to tear through the quiet like a storm. But the storm inside her was something darker, quieter, simmering beneath her skin. No. She wouldn't shout. She wouldn't give Laura the satisfaction. But one thing was certain. This would not stand. Elaine Carter would not be written off like this. Not by her daughter. Not by anyone. A low, steady ache began to form in her chest. A resolve, perhaps. Something inside her was shifting, hardening. She would find her voice again. And when she did, Laura would not be the one holding the pen. And that was only the beginning. The room felt colder, the silence heavier, as Elaine's mind moved forward, faster than her body could keep up. She had been silenced. But she wouldn't stay silent for long. Revenge story writer said. Elaine's breath trembled in her chest as the words finally began to form in her mind, sharp and steady, a lifeline to her slipping grip on the situation. Her fingers twitched against the cool hospital sheets, her heart thundering in her ears. The weight of the violation pressed heavily on her, but the moment had come. She could feel it in the air, the thick tension that enveloped the room. She had been silenced for too long, allowed others to speak for her, to make decisions for her. But no more. The nurse was still standing by the bed, pen poised, waiting for a signature that never came. Elaine's voice cracked the stillness like thunder. "I never consented to that," she said, her words clear, cutting through the fog of confusion that had settled around her. It was a small statement, but it felt like a declaration of war. She saw the nurse's eyes flicker, surprise widening her gaze. The room seemed to freeze, time stretching thin as everyone waited for the next move. The nurse opened her mouth to respond, but Elaine wasn't finished. "I never signed any DNR. I never agreed to it," Elaine repeated, her voice stronger now, a faint edge of steel slipping through the cracks of her initial disorientation. Laura stiffened, her eyes narrowing. She hadn't expected her mother to speak, much less speak back. There was a brief flash of something, frustration, but it disappeared quickly, replaced by her usual practiced composure. The mask slipped back into place. "Mom, please, don't make this harder," Laura said, her voice flat, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. "You've been out of it for hours. The nurse just needs a signature." Elaine cut her off with a sharp look. She hadn't been unconscious. She had heard enough to know exactly what had happened. "I heard everything, Laura," Elaine said, her voice thick with calm fury. "You don't get to make that decision for me. Not now. Not ever." Tom, who had been standing in the corner, watching with his usual reluctance, looked suddenly horrified. His face was pale, eyes wide with panic. "Elaine." Elaine locked eyes with him. "Don't you start, Tom. Don't you dare. This is between me and her." Her gaze flicked to Laura again, her voice low but unyielding. "You crossed a line." Tom stepped forward, his hands outstretched in a futile attempt to diffuse the escalating tension. But it was too late. Elaine had already crossed into a place where silence no longer had power over her. The nurse, visibly uncomfortable, stepped back. I'll need to get the hospital compliance staff involved, she said, her words stumbling as she backed out of the room. The door clicked closed behind her, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Elaine's heart pounded in her chest, but there was something else now, a quiet strength. She could feel it in her bones. Laura's defensive posture stiffened, her lips tight. "This is unnecessary, Mom," she spat, her voice tight with barely contained anger. "We're just trying to make sure you're comfortable. You don't know what's best for you anymore." Elaine's chest tightened at the words. She had heard them before, but they had never stung like this. She could feel her hands tremble, but she clenched them into fists, grounding herself in the moment. "I know exactly what's best for me," Elaine said, her voice calm but ironclad. "And it's not you." Tom, as usual, said nothing, his face a mask of anxiety. Elaine could feel the tension in the room, the oppressive silence as both of her children waited for the next move. But there was no more hesitation in her, no more fear. She had taken the first step, and there was no going back now. "Get me all the documentation," she said, her voice ringing with finality. "Every form, every record involving this DNR. I want everything." Riley, who had been standing quietly by the door, approached slowly, her hand reaching for Elaine's. Elaine squeezed her granddaughter's hand gently, seeking some comfort in the warmth of her touch. Riley's presence was a small, steady anchor amidst the storm that swirled around them. "I'll have Gordon come pick me up when I'm discharged," Elaine said softly, her voice steady now. She felt a sense of clarity settle over her as she made the decision. Gordon, ever the reliable friend, would be there for her. He always had been. Riley's fingers curled around hers. "Are you sure, Grandma? You're not alone in this. You don't have to do it all by yourself." Elaine smiled softly at her. "I know, sweetheart. But this is something I have to do. For me." There was a flicker of something in Riley's eyes, a silent understanding between them. Elaine wasn't doing this alone. Not anymore. But she had to take the first step herself. She had to reclaim her voice. Outside the door, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Moments later, a pair of hospital compliance officers entered, clipboard in hand. The air seemed to thicken, every breath drawn in preparation for the confrontation ahead. Elaine looked back at her daughter one last time, her gaze steady and unyielding. She had found her voice, and nothing would ever silence her again. The car hummed steadily beneath Elaine as Gordon drove her through the quiet streets of Richmond, the world outside softening into the muted colors of late afternoon. Her thoughts swirled in a restless fog, the conversation from the hospital still fresh and sharp in her mind. She could feel the cool air brushing against her skin as they passed under the skeletal branches of winter trees, their bare limbs reaching toward the sky like silent witnesses to her decision. The road ahead seemed longer than usual, but her grip on the seat remained firm. Gordon didn't speak. He never did. Not unless he was asked. He understood. Silence, in this case, was a comfort. Elaine looked out the window, feeling the weight of her own thoughts. The hospital room had been a battleground. Every word, every glance, a reminder of just how far Laura was willing to go. But now, as the familiar streets of her neighborhood approached, a strange calm washed over her. The decision was made. The battle wasn't over, but the first shot had been fired, and she had no intention of retreating. They pulled into the driveway, the sound of gravel crunching beneath the tires familiar and grounding. Gordon parked the car, and Elaine slowly unbuckled her seatbelt, the weight of her body heavier than she expected. She wasn't old. Not yet. But everything felt different now, as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted. She stepped out of the car and moved toward the front door, Gordon trailing quietly behind her. As soon as she stepped inside, the smell of her home, a mixture of old books, pine wood, and the faintest hint of lavender hit her like a wave of nostalgia. It was a comfort, but it also felt distant, as if she were seeing it all for the first time. The kitchen table was where it all began, she realized. The place where decisions were made, where history had been written, and where now she would begin to rewrite her own. Elaine sat down slowly, the ache in her bones a reminder of her age, but also the strength she hadn't fully realized she possessed until this very moment. Gordon quietly moved to the side, leaning against the counter as Elaine placed the DNR form on the table, her fingers still trembling as she flattened the creases from where it had been folded. The paper was thin, almost fragile under her touch, but it carried with it the weight of Laura's decision, a decision that had been made without her. Elaine studied it for a moment, her eyes tracing the bold, final signature at the bottom. Laura's signature. It should have been Elaine's, but Laura had taken it. The ink bled into the paper, but it was nothing compared to the stain Laura had left on their relationship. Elaine reached for a pen, her fingers steady as she began to document every detail of the conversation, every word spoken in that sterile hospital room. She wrote down Laura's tone, the nurse's hesitation, the way Tom had avoided the confrontation. Every moment felt crucial now. Every word etched into her memory as if she were preparing for a trial. She paused for a moment, her pen hovering above the page, as Gordon's voice broke the silence. "She overstepped," he said, his voice low but firm. "Now you step forward, Elaine. You have the power to rewrite this." Elaine looked up at him, her expression unreadable. Gordon had been there for years, steady and solid, never pushing, never demanding. He wasn't just her neighbor, he was her friend. The only one who hadn't faltered, who had never tried to control or manipulate her. In his presence, she found the courage to make decisions that no one had expected. She nodded, a slow and deliberate movement. Gordon was right. This wasn't just about the DNR anymore. This was about everything. About reclaiming her life, her choices, her legacy. Her eyes moved toward the dusty binder on the shelf. The estate binder. She hadn't looked at it in years. The world had changed since she'd last updated it. Her life had changed. The thought of revisiting it, of confronting the full scope of her assets and decisions, felt overwhelming, but necessary. The stakes had shifted. The cards had been dealt, and it was time to play her hand. Elaine stood, her knees creaking in protest as she made her way to the bookshelf. She pulled down the heavy binder, feeling the weight of it in her hands, as though it carried not just paper, but the years of her life. The pages inside were worn, yellowed at the edges, but everything was still there. Her will, her directives, her list of beneficiaries. Elaine opened it slowly, as though the contents might bite. She turned to the first page where Laura's name was listed as the primary beneficiary, her power of attorney, her healthcare proxy. It had all been set so long ago, in another time, when she had trusted Laura to be the one to make decisions for her. But that trust had been shattered. With a steady hand, Elaine crossed out Laura's name. It was a small act, but it felt like the first real step toward regaining control. She turned to the phone on the kitchen counter, her fingers trembling as she dialed Monica Trent's office. The phone rang twice before it was picked up. "Monica Trent's office," a voice answered, polite but clipped. "This is Elaine Carter," she said, her voice a quiet resolve. "I need an emergency appointment, today. I need to make changes to my estate plan." There was a pause on the other end, a slight hesitation. Elaine could almost hear the intake of breath as the woman processed the urgency in her voice. "I'll let Monica know. She'll be available shortly. We'll have you in as soon as we can." Elaine hung up the phone, feeling the weight of the decisions that lay ahead. The world outside seemed distant now, the cold January afternoon muted behind the windows. But the fire inside her, stronger than it had ever been, kept her warm. She had taken the first steps. Now there was no turning back. The drive to Monica Trent's office felt longer than it should have, though the sun was already beginning its slow descent into the horizon. The streets of Richmond seemed quieter now, the soft gray of the January sky pressing down like a weight, almost as if the city itself was holding its breath. Elaine sat in the passenger seat, the estate binder beside her, its heavy weight still too present in her hands. Gordon, quiet and steady, drove with the same calm precision he always had, but today, there was an unspoken tension between them, thick as smoke in the small space of the car. Elaine's thoughts were as sharp as the cold air biting at the windows. I've done what I can. But will it be enough? She kept her gaze fixed on the familiar landmarks passing by, the homes, the storefronts, the tree-lined streets where she had lived and loved and fought. But none of them seemed familiar anymore. She wasn't the woman she had been yesterday, or even the woman she had been an hour ago. By the time they reached Monica's office, Elaine felt as though she had already crossed an ocean and was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down into the unknown. Monica's office was tucked away in one of the quieter corners of the city, a quiet little brick building with ivy creeping up the sides. It was an oasis of control in an otherwise uncontrollable world. When they walked in, Elaine could almost feel the cool professionalism of the space seep into her skin. Monica's office was calm, deliberate, the kind of place where decisions were made, where everything had a place and a reason. Monica Trent, the elder law attorney, rose from behind her desk as soon as Elaine entered. She was tall, sharp-featured, and carried herself with the kind of confidence that made you trust her instantly. Her eyes, however, softened when they met Elaine's. She hadn't seen her in a while, but she remembered the look, determined, but guarded. "You're early," Monica said, her voice steady but curious, as she led them into a small conference room. "Come in." "Gordon, always a pleasure." Gordon nodded, settling into a chair by the window. Elaine slid the binder across the table. She didn't speak at first, just placed it there with the same care she had shown the DNR form hours before. Monica sat down across from her and glanced at the binder with an eyebrow raised. "I take it this is a serious matter?" Elaine gave a small nod, her throat tight. The words didn't come as easily as they had when she was alone. She took a deep breath and finally spoke, the words sharp and controlled. "I've been making changes. I need you to update my estate plan. Completely. Immediately." Monica's eyes narrowed slightly, her gaze flicking from the binder to Elaine. She didn't question her further, knowing better than to probe right away. Instead, she opened the binder, her eyes scanning the papers. She stopped when she reached the page with the DNR form, the thin paper now creased from where it had been folded and refolded. Elaine watched as Monica's face shifted, a slight furrow in her brow. She could feel the tension in the room tighten. "This," Monica began, her voice a little softer now. She glanced up at Elaine. "This was signed by your daughter, wasn't it?" Elaine nodded once. Monica's fingers lightly traced the edge of the DNR form, and Elaine could tell that she was already running through the legal implications in her mind. "Elaine, this is—" Monica stopped herself, her eyes hardening with a touch of disbelief. "This is not just an oversight. This is a serious breach. Laura shouldn't have signed this for you. You didn't consent to this. You were in no condition to give consent." "I wasn't even asked," Elaine said quietly, her words biting through the silence. Monica looked up from the paper, her eyes sharp and calculating. "This isn't just about a DNR. This is about the bigger picture. Proxies, beneficiaries, everything you've set up. It all needs to be reevaluated urgently." Elaine felt her pulse quicken. "I don't want Laura in any of it anymore. I don't trust her. Not with my health. Not with my legacy. She's overstepped. Gordon, who had been quietly observing, leaned forward in his chair, his voice low but firm. Elaine's right. Laura's been pushing her way through for years. It's time she knew there are consequences. Monica looked between the two of them, her expression softening for a moment before she spoke again. You hold all the cards now, Elaine. You're in control, and it's time to take that control back. Completely. We'll make sure it's all updated. Health proxies, power of attorney, your beneficiaries. We'll make sure your wishes are clear and enforceable. If you want Laura removed, we'll make it happen. Elaine's heart hammered in her chest. She hadn't expected to feel such a surge of relief at hearing those words. But she did. Monica's eyes softened. This is the turning point. You don't have to leave this up to someone else. You decide who gets to have a say in your life from now on. Elaine took a slow, steady breath. The weight of the decision she was about to make felt like a mountain pressing down on her chest, but somehow, it was a mountain she was ready to climb. Her fingers twitched with a need to take action. Let's do it then, she said, her voice steady. Let's make sure Laura has no part in my life, my health, or my legacy from now on. Monica smiled, and for the first time in days, Elaine felt a spark of something resembling peace. The fight had just begun, but she was no longer afraid. This was the moment when everything would change. The hum of the printer filled the small, quiet room in Monica's office as Elaine sat at the polished oak desk, her fingers lightly grazing the edges of the documents before her. The weight of each paper felt like a small but deliberate step forward. Each decision, a weight she was choosing to bear. It wasn't a burden, not anymore. It was power. Monica stood to the side, her back straight, her gaze focused on Elaine, but with a quiet respect. Elaine could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, each tick of the clock louder than the last. She'd asked for this, she'd demanded this, and now, she was ready to seal it. Gordon stood at the window, watching the trees outside sway gently in the breeze, his eyes distant but aware. He'd been her constant, her anchor, and now he was the witness to the most significant decision Elaine had ever made. A decision to reclaim what had been taken from her, piece by piece, over the years. Elaine reached for the first document, the new healthcare proxy. It was a simple piece of paper, yet the act of signing it felt monumental. Her pen hovered above the signature line for a long moment. She could feel the weight of it, the magnitude of what she was about to do. She hadn't just been signing her name to a document. She was signing away everything she had once allowed Laura to control, her health, her decisions, her life. Without hesitation, Elaine signed her name, her hand steady. It wasn't the first time she'd signed such a form, but this time, everything was different. This time, it wasn't Laura's name that followed. This time, she removed her daughter completely. Laura's name is gone, Elaine muttered under her breath, as if to confirm it to herself. She glanced at Monica, who gave her a solemn nod. The attorney had already prepared the paperwork for the changes to the estate, the power of attorney, and the list of medical proxies. Everything was ready. Elaine paused for a moment, then added something more. Riley, her granddaughter. Riley would be her secondary healthcare contact once she turned 18. Elaine felt her chest tighten as she wrote Riley's name, careful and deliberate, on the page. Her granddaughter, the only one who had truly understood her, the only one who had stood by her without judgment, was the one she wanted to trust with her health. Riley had never asked for this, but Elaine knew, deep down, that it was right. Riley had never tried to control her, never tried to impose her will. The young girl was a constant reminder of what love and respect looked like in its purest form. The pen moved swiftly across the page as Elaine signed again, her signature now flowing with newfound purpose. She turned the page, her eyes scanning the updated will. Laura's name was gone, completely erased, as if it had never been there to begin with. Elaine had spent so many years feeling guilty about the decision to leave her daughter the bulk of her estate. But no more. There was something liberating in the act of crossing out the names of those who had failed her, those who had taken her trust and used it against her. Laura, in her pursuit of control, had left Elaine with no choice but to take it all back. Elaine signed the will with a steady hand, feeling the finality of it. There was no going back now. She didn't stop there. She turned to the final document, the one that had been a seed in her mind for years. A charitable trust, designed to support literacy for underprivileged children. A legacy that had nothing to do with her past mistakes, nothing to do with the people who had betrayed her. This was Elaine's gift to the world, her last word on the matter, her mark on the future. Literacy, she murmured to herself, as her pen danced across the page, a gift that can never be taken away. The documents were complete now. The house of cards had been shuffled, and the pieces were falling into place. Gordon came over, standing beside her, his hands gently taking the papers from her. He moved methodically, pulling a small notary stamp from his bag and affixing it to each page with a soft but firm pressure. Elaine watched, feeling the last of her doubt slip away. Monica, ever the professional, watched the proceedings silently, a small but approving smile on her lips. She knew this moment wasn't just about legal documents. It was about reclaiming control over a life that had slipped through Elaine's fingers. As Gordon finished, Elaine leaned back in her chair, her eyes closing for a moment as she allowed herself the briefest of breaths. She felt lighter. No longer tethered to the past, to the choices she had made when her heart had been softer, her judgment clouded by guilt. "I'll file these with the state," Monica said, her voice breaking the silence. "We'll make sure all medical systems and financial institutions are updated." Elaine's mind drifted, almost hearing the sounds of her own heartbeat. Her name would be cleared. Her decisions would be hers alone. For the first time in a long while, she was no longer just a passive participant in her own life. Gordon placed the last of the documents back into the binder, handing it gently to Elaine. She held it in her lap for a moment, almost feeling the weight of a lifetime's decisions pressing into her. "You did it," Gordon said, his voice steady. Elaine looked at him, feeling the quiet pride in his gaze. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an accusation. It was the affirmation she needed. "I did," she said softly, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at her lips. "And now, it's done." The battle wasn't over. Not yet. There were still forces out there. Forces that wanted to take control of her life, to reshape it into something she hadn't chosen. But that was the old world. This one was hers. The finality of it hit her then, a rush of clarity. This was the beginning of something new, something uncharted. And there was no turning back. The phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, its sudden noise breaking the quiet of the house like an unwelcome guest. Elaine looked at it without moving, her fingers wrapped around the handle of the teacup, its warmth steady in her hand. The tea, strong and fragrant, filled her senses, anchoring her to the calm of the moment. The phone buzzed again. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Laura. Always Laura, trying to worm her way back in with those insistent, demanding messages. Always the same tone, the same desperate need for control wrapped in the guise of concern. But Elaine was done with the games, done with the manipulation. She let the phone buzz again, its vibration sending a faint tremor through the wooden surface of the kitchen island. She took a slow sip of her tea, her gaze distant, but her mind clearer than it had been in years. The message wasn't important. What Laura had to say no longer mattered. Elaine set the teacup down, the porcelain clicking softly against the counter. A sense of finality had settled over her. thick and undeniable. She didn't need to hear the words that came out of Laura's mouth anymore. Not when she had already heard it all. She had already heard the lies, the excuses, the pleading, and she was done listening. Instead, she picked up the file Monica had left her, a stack of paperwork that felt like a weight lifted from her chest. She opened it carefully, scanning the first pages where Monica had already begun drafting a no-contact order for medical decisions. The legal jargon was precise, cold, but Elaine found a quiet sense of satisfaction in it. This would make everything official. Laura would have no say, no access, no control. Elaine read through the document again, her hand running over the edges of the paper, feeling its coolness. It was exactly what she needed. Exactly what she wanted. She signed it without hesitation. Behind her, Gordon was busy at work. The soft click of tools and the rustle of paper reminded her that everything in her life was being changed now, things that would never again return to how they had been. The locks on the doors were being replaced, the codes to the security system updated. Each key, each code now belonged only to her. No one would have access to her home unless she allowed it. Elaine's gaze drifted out the window, where Gordon moved methodically, checking the perimeter of the house. It felt almost surreal, watching the outside world carry on while everything within these walls was being transformed. She hadn't asked for this kind of life, this constant battle for control, but it was the one she had been handed, and now she would fight for it. As Gordon worked, Elaine turned her attention back to the pile of documents on the counter. She needed to be thorough. Every loose end had to be tied up. She opened her online banking app, her fingers steady as she navigated the account. Laura's name, once at the top as a beneficiary, was now gone. Removed. Elaine felt no guilt. The name that had once been her daughter's would never again be attached to anything of hers. The inheritance, the assets, the trust, none of it would pass to Laura. The trust was now for Riley, the only one who had shown her real care. The phone buzzed again, insistent. Elaine didn't reach for it. She had already made her decision. She wasn't going to entertain Laura's attempts at re-entry. No more apologies, no more explanations. She was done. She could feel it in her bones. She was done. A voicemail notification popped up, and without thinking, she pressed the button to listen. Elaine. Tom's voice crackled through the speaker, low and strained. Please, I don't know what's going on with you and Laura, but you need to understand. She's upset. She's just worried about you. You know she loves you. Don't shut us out like this. Please. I'm asking you. Just talk to her. For your own sake. Elaine closed her eyes, feeling the familiar mix of exhaustion and frustration settle deep in her gut. Tom's voice, so meek and pleading, always trying to smooth things over, always trying to make everyone happy. It's too late, Tom. The words formed in her mind, but they never reached her lips. She wasn't going to do this anymore. She wasn't going to let his passivity pull her back into the cycle of compromise. Not this time. She deleted the voicemail and muted the phone, placing it face down on the counter. There was a quiet finality to the gesture, a statement of boundaries that had never been made so clearly before. The house was silent now, save for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Time felt stretched, but Elaine didn't mind. She was in control of it now. Her own time. Her own life. Gordon came in, wiping his hands on his jeans as he stood beside her. All done, he said, his voice quiet but firm. He didn't need to say anything more. His presence was enough. The house, the locks, the systems. They were all secured. No one would intrude now. Elaine met his gaze, her eyes steady. For the first time, she felt something like peace settle in her chest. A weight had been lifted, and in its place was a clarity she hadn't known she'd been missing. She stood and walked over to the window, looking out at the snow beginning to fall. The world outside was quiet, soft, and she realized that for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could finally breathe. Her life, her choices, everything was hers to decide. And it was enough. But in the back of her mind, she knew that this peace was temporary. It was only a matter of time before Laura would come knocking again, demanding answers. But Elaine was ready. This time, she wouldn't back down. And when the storm came, she would be the one to weather it. The doorbell rang, its sharp chime slicing through the quiet house. Elaine paused, the pen she'd been holding trembling slightly as the soft hum of the kettle echoed in the background. She had just finished organizing her retirement accounts and updating the property records. Small, methodical tasks that brought a sense of control. But it was the knock on the door, the familiar sound of Riley's presence, that caused her to breathe a little deeper. She stood, pushing the papers aside, and walked slowly to the door, her steps deliberate. As she opened it, there was Riley, her granddaughter, standing on the doorstep with her backpack slung loosely over one shoulder, her face unreadable but calm. Riley's quiet presence was both a relief and a reminder of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. "Hi, Grandma," Riley said softly, her voice laced with something unspoken, an understanding far too mature for her age. "Come in," Elaine replied, stepping aside. Riley didn't need an invitation, not anymore. She walked in with a grace that was all her own, setting her backpack down by the door as she slipped off her shoes and walked into the living room, her gaze never quite meeting Elaine's. Elaine followed her into the room, watching her granddaughter with quiet curiosity. Riley was the only person left in her life who seemed to see her fully, who didn't try to bend her to their will or fit her into a mold. She had always been different from the others, more observant, more intuitive. And Elaine could sense, deep down, that Riley knew something was wrong. Riley finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I heard what happened at the hospital. I overheard everything." Elaine's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't intended for Riley to be in the room that day. She hadn't meant for her to hear it all. The conversation about the DNR, the silent struggle. But there it was, laid bare between them now. Riley's eyes were wide with something between concern and quiet resolve. Elaine took a slow breath, her hand settling on the back of the couch as she faced her granddaughter. "You're not supposed to have heard that," she said gently, her voice soft but firm. "It wasn't for you. It wasn't meant to put you in the middle." Riley shook her head slightly, the corners of her mouth tilting downward. "I know, Grandma, but I heard it, and I know it wasn't right." Elaine's heart clenched, a sudden wave of protectiveness washing over her. She wanted to reassure Riley, wanted to shield her from the mess of adult emotions and conflicts that she had been dragged into. But the truth was, Riley was already aware, already part of this storm. Elaine knelt down, meeting Riley's gaze with the calmest look she could muster. "Riley, I know this is hard, but you have to understand. Your mom, she hesitated, the words feeling heavier than she expected. "She's not the person I thought she was, and I can't allow her to make those decisions for me. Not anymore." Riley nodded, a slow, understanding gesture. "I don't want you to be hurt, Grandma. I just want you to be okay." Elaine reached out and gently cupped Riley's face, her thumb brushing the soft skin beneath her eye. She felt a sudden wave of gratitude for this girl who had stood by her quietly, without question, without hesitation. "I'll be okay, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice steady. "And you don't have to carry this burden. It's mine to bear. But you're part of my family, and that matters more than anything." Gordon's voice broke through the quiet, a soft murmur from the kitchen. "Elaine, I've finished logging everything." Elaine stood, her gaze lingering on Riley for a moment longer. before she made her way toward the kitchen. Gordon was sitting at the table surrounded by piles of neatly organized paperwork, each hospital document, each signed directive, each legal form now securely filed in a binder. The task was a small but necessary one, a way of ensuring everything was in order for the inevitable battles ahead. The storm wasn't over. Not yet. But the groundwork was being laid. Elaine walked over to Gordon, her fingers grazing the edge of the binder. She felt a strange sense of finality as she ran her hand across it, knowing that her life, her decisions, were now secure, protected in ways they hadn't been before. "I'll get started on the rest of it," she said, her voice calm. She knew there was still work to be done, more accounts to review, more decisions to finalize. But for now, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. As she returned to the living room, she found Riley standing by the window, watching the quiet snowfall outside. The white flakes fluttered gently to the ground, adding to the stillness of the day. It was beautiful, and for a brief moment Elaine allowed herself to feel it, to feel the calm that came with knowing she had control over her life once again. "Grandma?" Riley's voice was soft, hesitant. Elaine looked up, her eyes meeting her granddaughter's. "Yes, darling? Can we go for a walk? Just to get some air?" Elaine hesitated for a moment, looking out the window. The world outside was cold, but there was something peaceful about it, something cleansing. "Sure," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. "Let's go." The two of them stepped outside into the quiet, the snow falling softly around them as they walked together down the path. Elaine felt the chill of the air against her skin, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was refreshing. It reminded her that she was still here, still standing, despite everything that had been taken from her. And as she looked down at Riley, walking beside her with that quiet strength, Elaine felt a new sense of purpose settle in her chest. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living, choosing every step she took, every decision she made. And that was enough. The email notification appeared on Elaine's phone just as she was finishing her tea. The time had passed slowly, but it had been a productive day. Finalizing her estate plan, updating the documents, ensuring the future she could control was laid out before her. The email subject line read simply, Recent events at the hospital. Elaine didn't hesitate. She unlocked her phone and opened it. It was from Ethan, Laura's attorney. "Dear Mrs. Carter, we understand there may have been some confusion surrounding the signing of the DNR form at the hospital. It seems there was a miscommunication about your consent. As such, we are requesting a meeting to resolve this matter amicably and discuss next steps. Please let us know when you are available to speak. Sincerely, Ethan Gray, S. Ken." Elaine read the words again, her fingers tightening around the phone. Miscommunication? She exhaled sharply, a dry laugh escaping her lips. There was no miscommunication. Laura had made the decision, plain and simple. And now Ethan was trying to cover for her. But Elaine wasn't going to let this slip by. Not anymore. She stood and walked to the desk, where her binder was open, the neatly organized documents just waiting for the next piece to fall into place. She'd been expecting something like this, a feeble attempt to undo everything Laura had done. To distract her with words and apologies, Elaine quickly tapped a few keys on her laptop and pulled up the time-stamped hospital logs. Monica had already sent them to her, along with the nurse's statements, exactly what had transpired that day. The evidence was clear. There had been no miscommunication. Laura had signed the DNR form without Elaine's consent. Monica's paperwork was thorough, detailed, and irrefutable. Elaine attached the logs and statements to a new email. Her fingers flew across the keys, typing with precision. "Dear Mr. Gray, thank you for your email. I have reviewed your concerns, and I would like to clarify the situation. Attached you will find the hospital logs, including the time-stamped records and the nurses' statements regarding the events that took place. As you can see, I did not consent to the DNR form. There was no confusion, only a deliberate attempt to act on behalf of my daughter without my approval. I trust this clears up any misunderstanding. Regards, Elaine Carter. She attached the files and hit send, her finger lingering over the mouse for a moment longer than necessary. The air in the room felt heavier, charged with an energy that made her feel more alive than she had in days. There was no going back now. She had drawn the line in the sand, and she wasn't going to apologize for it. She set the phone down and glanced over at Gordon, who had been quietly working on something by the door. She could see the faint lines of exhaustion etched into his face, though he hadn't let it show. "You heard from Tom, didn't you?" Elaine asked, her voice steady but with an edge of anticipation. Gordon nodded, still focused on the task at hand. "Yeah, he left a voicemail earlier, trying to smooth things over." Elaine's lips tightened. Tom. The same man who had always been in Laura's shadow, who had never taken a stand, who had always been a passive participant in his own life. He wasn't a threat, not like Laura, but his words still managed to sting. Even now he couldn't see what was happening. She didn't want to hear the weak apology. She didn't need it. Gordon placed the small drill he'd been using down on the table and walked over to the window, his gaze distant. "I think it's time we take more precautions. You never know what they might do next." Elaine didn't need to ask. She had already sensed it. Gordon had been installing the new security system over the past week, updating the locks, replacing the codes, making sure no one could get through without her permission. "Let's add a camera," Elaine said, her voice calm but firm. "In the front, where they can't get too close." Gordon didn't hesitate. "I'll take care of it today." Elaine watched as he left the room, his presence a reminder that, even in the face of all the challenges, she wasn't alone. She was no longer an isolated woman fighting against the tide. She had a team, and they weren't backing down. As she sat back down at the table, her eyes moved to the sketch Riley had left for her earlier in the week. A small digital drawing, simple yet profound. Elaine and Riley, side by side, holding hands. It was more than just a drawing. It was a promise. A silent vow of support. Of family. Of love that hadn't wavered in the midst of it all. The weight of the drawing sat heavily in her heart. Riley had seen it all. Riley knew. And yet, she hadn't pulled away. She hadn't faltered. She stood by her side, unwavering. It was the only thing that had kept Elaine grounded through everything, the unwavering support of this one person who truly understood her. Elaine picked up the drawing, staring at it for a long moment. Then, with a slow and deliberate movement, she placed it in the binder, right between the estate documents and the hospital logs. She'd make sure it was always there, a reminder that, even in the midst of all the chaos, there was still something real, something pure, something worth fighting for. She took a deep breath, looking out the window at the falling snow. She could hear Gordon working outside, the sound of tools and hardware a steady rhythm. The house was quiet, safe, secure. But deep down, Elaine knew the real work had just begun. This fight wasn't over. Not yet. And she was ready. Elaine sat at her desk, the soft glow of the computer screen illuminating her face as she sifted through the documents once again. The final pieces were falling into place, accounts updated, powers of attorney finalized, all the necessary steps to ensure her decisions would stand. Yet her mind kept drifting back to the one question that had been gnawing at her. When would they come for her? The house was quiet now, save for the low hum of the heating system and the faint sounds of Gordon working outside. The sun had set, and the cold darkness outside wrapped around the house like a thick, protective veil. But as she glanced over at the security camera feed on her laptop, the quiet of the house was suddenly interrupted by the figure at the door. It was Laura. Elaine's hand hovered over the mouse, her eyes narrowing as she watched Laura stand on the front porch, pounding on the door with increasing desperation. The camera angle showed Laura's figure framed by the faint light spilling from the porch, her body rigid with anger, her hands raised in a futile attempt to force her way in. Elaine's breath caught in her throat. She didn't need to see Laura's face to know the look in her eyes, the same one she'd seen too many times before. A mix of entitlement and fury, as if the world owed her everything, as if Elaine's decisions were nothing more than obstacles to be bulldozed. Laura's fists struck the door again, louder this time, each bang ringing through the quiet house. "No, I won't open the door. Not anymore." The thought passed through Elaine's mind with a clarity she hadn't felt before. This time, there would be no more pleading, no more pretending things could be fixed. Gordon entered the room quietly, his steps soft but purposeful. He hadn't been able to avoid the sound of Laura's demands either, though he hadn't said a word. His presence was steady, and Elaine could sense the calm resolve in him, the quiet determination that matched her own. Gordon stood by her side, glancing at the screen. "She's not giving up, is she?" he said, his voice barely above a murmur. Elaine didn't answer immediately. Instead, she watched Laura's figure on the porch, her movements growing more frantic, more insistent. It was clear now. This wasn't just a plea for reconciliation. This was a demand for control, a final push to break through the walls Elaine had so carefully erected. Elaine felt her pulse quicken as Laura's fists slammed against the door once more. "You need to leave," Gordon said, his voice unwavering, the words spoken with a quiet authority that sent a ripple of cold through the room. Elaine nodded. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. But the sight of Laura outside, raging with all the power she once held over her mother, was an unsettling reminder of how deep the manipulation ran. Gordon's hand moved to the door, and with one final look at Elaine, he stepped outside. He walked across the porch with deliberate calm, his steps firm against the cold stone. Elaine could hear their muffled exchange through the camera feed, the sharpness of Laura's voice cutting through the quiet night air. "I have every right to be here," Laura's voice shrieked, high-pitched with anger. "This is my mother's house. She can't do this to me." Gordon's response was cool and calm, his words slow but clear. "Elaine doesn't want you here, and you're not welcome." Elaine watched, her chest tightening as Laura's face twisted with fury, her hands raised again, fingers clawing at the air as if she could reach through the screen, through the door itself, to reclaim what she thought was hers. "You'll regret this," Laura shouted, her voice cracking with the force of her outrage. "I'll take you to court. I'll make sure you never see a penny of her estate." Gordon didn't flinch. He stood his ground, unwavering. "You need to leave now," he said again, his voice quieter this time, but laced with finality. The camera captured the rawness of Laura's fury, her face contorted with a mixture of disbelief and rage. But there was something else in her eyes, too, a recognition, a flicker of fear. She could feel it now, the walls closing in around her. The control she had taken for granted was slipping away, and for the first time, she was powerless. After a long moment, Laura turned sharply, her boots crunching against the frozen ground as she stormed off the porch, her coat flaring behind her like a storm cloud. The camera followed her retreat, capturing her angry stride as she disappeared into the night, the sound of her footsteps fading in the distance. Elaine felt a cold calm settle over her as the door clicked shut. She didn't move immediately, didn't speak. She just sat there for a moment, watching the empty porch through the lens of the camera. But then, the stillness of the house was broken by the ping of her phone. Monica's name flashed across the screen. Elaine didn't hesitate. She opened the message, already knowing what was coming. Elaine, I've updated the file with the footage from your porch camera. This will be crucial for the legal separation you're pursuing. You're well within your rights. We'll file everything with the court and ensure Laura has no access to any of your assets. She'll have no choice but to comply. Elaine closed the message with a slow, deliberate movement. She had made her stand. She had drawn the line. And now, the consequences would come. With a steady hand, Elaine removed Laura's name from every remaining document: her will, her medical directives, her financial accounts. Everything that once belonged to Laura was now gone, replaced with names that truly mattered: Riley, Gordon, the legacy of the charitable trust she had built. She set the final document down on the table, the ink still drying as she let out a long, measured breath. For the first time in years, Elaine felt the weight of a burden lifted. The storm was still coming, but she was no longer afraid of the chaos it would bring. This time, she was the one in control. And she would never open that door again. The knock at the door was soft but insistent, followed by a brief, sharp ring of the doorbell. Elaine's heart stuttered in her chest as she slowly looked up from the stack of papers in front of her. It had been hours since she'd finalized everything, since she'd drawn the final line. Her hands were steady as she reached for the door, though the calm on the surface couldn't mask the unease that coiled inside her. She opened the door to find two uniformed officers standing on the porch. Their presence felt jarring, but not entirely unexpected. "Mrs. Carter?" the taller one asked, his voice polite but firm. Elaine nodded, her heart sinking as she braced herself for what they might say next. "We received a report from a concerned party. Your daughter, Laura Carter, came to your home earlier this evening and was apparently upset," the officer explained, his words clipped, professional. "We just wanted to check in with you. Is everything okay here?" Elaine's breath caught in her throat for a moment, but she quickly steadied herself. "So she's gone to the police now?" "I'm fine," Elaine said, her voice calm, almost too calm. "I have no need for a complaint." "She left on her own accord. There's nothing more to report." The officer didn't look entirely convinced, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Are you sure? We can file a report if you want to." "No." Elaine cut him off, her tone final. "I don't need any further involvement. She's gone, and it's over." The officer exchanged a brief look with his partner. He nodded as if processing her calm demeanor before pulling out a notepad. "Well, if you change your mind, here's the number. Just let us know." Elaine didn't hesitate. "I won't. Thank you." She shut the door behind them with a soft click, her hands shaking for the briefest of moments before she steadied them against the cool wood of the doorframe. In the silence that followed, she heard the faint sound of Gordon moving around in the kitchen. His presence was a constant, steady reminder that, for all the chaos swirling outside, she wasn't alone. She took a long, slow breath, her pulse still elevated. There was a feeling of disconnection, almost surreal, like she was watching her own life unfold from a distance. The storm had arrived at her doorstep, and yet it had felt anticlimactic, a mere flash of intensity before it disappeared into the night. As the minutes passed, Elaine moved back to her desk, the weight of the police visit still hanging in the air. The paperwork Monica had prepared sat untouched in front of her, the weight of the next steps pressing down harder now. Monica's message had been clear. If Elaine truly wanted to sever ties, every protective measure needed to be in place. Identity theft was just as much a threat as any legal battle. The next steps were vital. Elaine grabbed the papers from the pile, steadying her hands as she signed the forms blocking Laura from any access to her healthcare systems. The weight of the pen in her hand felt oddly reassuring, its sharp click as the ink met the page, a small act of defiance. In the kitchen, Gordon was moving through the room, his hands sorting through the last of the loose papers. Elaine's mind wandered back to Riley. She hadn't spoken to her much since the confrontation with Laura. The words left unsaid between them lingered in the air like fog, thick and unspoken. As if on cue, Riley appeared in the doorway, her small frame leaning hesitantly against the doorframe. Her eyes were searching, her gaze cautious. "Grandma?" Riley's voice was soft, tentative. Elaine set the pen down, offering a small smile as she gestured to the chair beside her. "Come sit, sweetie." Riley stepped forward, her footsteps quiet on the hardwood floor. She sat beside Elaine, her shoulders still holding a tension that Elaine could sense, even without words. There was a stillness between them that hadn't been there before. A quiet understanding. "Grandma, did I do the right thing?" Riley's voice cracked slightly as she asked the question, her eyes filled with uncertainty. Elaine exhaled, her hand brushing Riley's hair back from her forehead. She knew what her granddaughter was asking. The weight of everything they had been through in such a short time was settling heavily on her small shoulders. "Riley," Elaine said, her voice soft but steady. "You did nothing wrong. You've stood by me when others turned away. And for that, I'll always be grateful. But this is mine to handle. You don't need to carry any of this." Riley nodded slowly, her eyes still searching for reassurance. Elaine could see the weight in them, the fear, the doubt that lingered at the edges of her confidence. Elaine's heart ached for her, but she knew Riley wasn't the one who needed fixing. She was the one who needed to be strong, to carry the burden of these decisions. Riley had already done more than enough. Elaine squeezed her hand gently. "I've made my choice, sweetheart, and it's the right one for me. It's time to let go of what's been holding me back. And that means letting go of everything, everyone who's tried to control me." The doorbell rang again, a sharp sound that broke through the quiet, and Elaine felt her heart tighten in her chest. Another wave was coming, but this time she wasn't afraid. She would weather it, this time, on her terms. The storm was far from over, but the tide had turned, and Elaine Carter was no longer the one swept away by it. The doorbell rang again, its sound sharper this time, almost like an accusation. Elaine didn't move at first. She knew who it was. She knew the insistent tone, the relentless need for attention. It had been days since Laura stormed off the porch, but clearly, she wasn't finished. Elaine sat perfectly still in her chair, her fingers curled tightly around the edge of her desk. Her eyes flicked to the security camera feed, and there she was, Laura, standing on the sidewalk just beyond the front gate, her posture rigid with anger, her mouth open in what could only be a tirade. The figure was unmistakable. Not today, Elaine thought, refusing to let her pulse spike in response to the presence outside. She could hear the muffled cadence of Laura's voice through the camera feed, but she wasn't listening anymore. Laura's words were all the same. It didn't matter what she yelled, what accusations she hurled at Elaine. They meant nothing anymore. From her seat, Elaine could see the vague outline of Tom in the background, trying to step between Laura and the door, his posture uncertain, pleading for peace. She imagined the scene. Laura, explosive and shrill, Tom doing his best to placate, and there was Elaine, a quiet figure behind the walls of her own home, choosing not to engage. Gordon had already moved into the hallway. He'd seen the image on the screen, heard the yelling through the door. Without a word, he grabbed his phone, unlocking it with swift fingers. He walked out onto the porch and started filming. Elaine didn't need to ask why. He had become her protector in the weeks since everything had shifted. He knew this was just the beginning, that Laura wasn't done trying to breach the walls she'd once so easily walked through. But this time, it wasn't going to be as simple as making a scene and walking away. Elaine wouldn't let it. Not now. Outside, she could hear Tom's voice finally cutting through the cacophony. "Laura, please, just stop. I'm asking you to calm down." But his voice was thin, shaky. He was already losing ground, the walls of his passivity crumbling beneath Laura's force. Elaine pressed her palms flat against the desk, steadying herself, refusing to step into that space anymore. She wasn't going out there. Not now. Not for Laura. Not for anyone who didn't respect the boundaries she'd drawn. "Let her scream," Elaine muttered to herself, her voice quiet but firm. "It's all she knows how to do." Through the camera, she could see Gordon adjusting his position, ensuring the footage was clear, making sure everything was captured with perfect clarity for what was to come. She didn't know what Laura thought this was, an emotional tirade or an attempt at guilt manipulation. The doorbell rang again, sharper this time, followed by another loud bang. Laura's fist was pounding against the door now, but it was no use. Gordon remained unfazed as he filmed, capturing every desperate move with the cold precision of a man who knew how important it was to have proof. Elaine reached for her phone, glancing at the time. She wasn't waiting for Laura to retreat this time. She wasn't letting this become another emotional ploy. She tapped out a quick message, her fingers swift and steady. "Monica, it's happening again. I need to file a legal separation from her influence. Please respond." Within seconds, her phone buzzed with Monica's reply. The attorney's response was firm, measured. "We've already started the process, Elaine. I'll take care of the filing. It's time to take full control of the narrative, once and for all. You're well within your rights. This is the final step." Elaine read the message twice. She wasn't waiting anymore. She wasn't pretending that there was any part of this that wasn't deliberate, any part that didn't require action. She picked up the phone and called Monica's office. "Monica, it's Elaine. I need to file for the full legal separation from Laura's influence. It's time." The line was quiet for a moment before Monica responded with her usual calm, decisive tone. "We're filing for full legal separation from her influence. I'll handle the paperwork, Elaine. It's happening. It's the right step." Elaine felt a weight lift, though she knew the battle had just shifted to new ground. There was no more gray area. Laura had crossed every line possible, and now it would be done in the eyes of the law. As the call ended, Gordon walked back into the room, phone still in hand, eyes serious. "I've got everything filmed. She's on record now. It's official." Elaine nodded, standing slowly and making her way over to her desk. "Good. Let's make sure it sticks this time." The doorbell rang again, but this time Elaine didn't feel the sting of intrusion. This was her house. This was her life. And she had made the choice to protect it. As the sound of Laura's yelling died down, Elaine looked at Gordon, her voice steady and unshaken. "We're done being controlled," she said quietly. "It's time to take back everything." Outside, the wind howled as the storm clouds gathered once again, but this time, Elaine was no longer standing in its path. The battle for control had begun, and she would be the one to win it. The day had been long, but not in the way Elaine had expected. She had spent hours reviewing her files, sending emails, making sure every protective measure was in place. It was a quiet sort of battle, a long game of outlasting the storm. But now, as evening settled over the house, she sat in the study, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows over her desk. Her phone buzzed, Monica's name flashing on the screen. Elaine hesitated only for a moment before answering, the weight of what was coming next pressing into her chest like a tightening vice. "Elaine," Monica's voice came through, cool and professional. "The board has reviewed the improper DNR signing. They're taking it seriously. The nurse statements are confirmed. You're in the clear." Elaine closed her eyes for a moment, letting the relief wash over her. It was official now. After everything, after the storm of emotions and threats, this was the vindication she needed. Laura's attempts to manipulate and control were exposed, Nothing more than an act of self-interest, a breach that could no longer be ignored. The hospital's issuing an official notice to you, Monica continued. They're holding Laura accountable for what happened. You'll receive a formal letter soon. Elaine nodded, her gaze drifting to the window. The snow had started falling softly outside, the world turning into a quiet, peaceful white landscape, the kind of stillness she had been longing for. Thank you, Monica, Elaine said, her voice steady, her fingers tightening around the phone as she spoke. I know this isn't over, but it feels like the first real victory. It is. And we'll keep fighting to ensure Laura's influence is completely removed. Everything's in motion. Elaine hung up the phone, her mind processing the wave of relief, the sense of finality that had settled over her. It's done. It's really done. She stood, stretching the tension out of her back, then walked to the window. The snow fell gently, swirling in the evening air, coating the world outside in a blanket of soft, silent peace. For a moment, everything felt calm, as though the world had decided to pause, to let her breathe. But even in the quiet, there was a stillness that felt different now. Calm, but not uncertain. Elaine had chosen this. Every step she'd taken, every boundary she'd set had led her here, to a place where she no longer had to hide or question herself. She had reclaimed her power, and there was no going back. As she turned back toward the desk, another message popped up on her phone. This one was from Riley. Elaine's heart tightened, a different kind of warmth filling her chest as she read the short voicemail. Grandma, I'm here for you. I love you. Elaine felt a lump form in her throat. Riley's words, so simple and so pure, had become her anchor. They were the quiet strength she hadn't known she needed. Every day, Riley had stood by her. No questions, no judgment. Just love. The one thing that had never wavered. Elaine closed her eyes for a moment, holding the phone to her chest as she let the truth of those words sink in. The door creaked open behind her, and she didn't need to turn to know it was Gordon. His presence was like a steady heartbeat, calm and grounded. The security system is fully updated, he said, his voice low and reassuring. And everything is on track with the legal filings. The storm's passing, Elaine. Elaine nodded, her smile small but genuine. She turned to face him, the warmth of his support a reminder that she hadn't done this alone. Thank you, Gordon, for everything. He gave her a small nod, his expression soft but resolute. We're in this together. The snow outside had begun to fall more heavily now, blanketing everything in white, as if the earth itself was wrapping them in a blanket of calm. The cold air outside had become a symbol of all the battles she'd fought, all the walls she'd put up, and now, the quiet was a reward she hadn't known she needed. Elaine stepped over to the window, her gaze lingering on the snow, on the stillness that had settled over the world. This is peace, she thought. This is mine to keep. But just as she stood there, allowing the quiet to settle into her bones, her phone buzzed again. This time, the notification was from Monica. She opened it, a tight knot of anticipation forming in her chest. Elaine, I've just received the final confirmation on the paperwork. We're officially filing for a complete separation. You're fully protected. Laura has no more claim to anything. Elaine felt a slow exhale pass through her lips. The finality of the words hit her harder than she expected. She had made it. The battle had been long, the cost had been high, but the victory was hers. As the snow continued to fall outside, covering the world in its pure, untouched whiteness, Elaine finally allowed herself to feel the weight of everything she had fought for, knowing with certainty that the future she was walking toward was one she would shape, and one that would never again be controlled by anyone but her. But deep down, she knew something else. The storm was always waiting for the right moment to return, and when it did, she would be ready. The knock on the door came quietly, almost tentative. But it felt like the prelude to something that would shake the calm Elaine had worked so hard to build. She had been expecting this moment, the final evaluation, but that didn't mean she was prepared for it. She stood from her desk slowly, the papers she'd been reviewing now a blur in her hands, as the weight of the final steps pressed against her chest. She checked the time on her phone. Monica had warned her about the visit, but even so, Elaine couldn't shake the feeling of impending tension. Opening the door, she found the APS investigator standing on her porch. The man was tall and professional, his expression neutral, his folder clutched against his chest. He was a stranger, someone who had been assigned to ensure that Elaine's competency was intact, that her decisions were her own. "Mrs. Carter?" he asked. His voice polite but no nonsense. Elaine nodded, her pulse steady. "Yes. Please, come in." The investigator entered without hesitation, glancing briefly around the entryway before following Elaine into the living room. He moved with the professionalism of someone who had done this 100 times. Elaine offered him a seat, though she stayed standing, her feet planted firmly beneath her as she felt the weight of this moment settle over her. She'd been through a lot, had handled every step herself. She wasn't going to falter now. The investigator sat down, flipping through the folder in his hands. Elaine could see the documents, her own name at the top. Everything she had so carefully prepared, her medical directives, her updated will, the statements from the hospital and the nursing staff, all laid out for him to review. "Mrs. Carter," he began, his tone clinical but not unkind, "I'm here to evaluate your mental and emotional competency. It's standard procedure for cases like yours, where there's a challenge to your decision-making capacity. I need to ensure that everything you've done has been in your best interest." Elaine didn't flinch. She had expected the formality, the questions that would be asked, but something in her felt solid, unmovable, as though she had already crossed a threshold that could never be undone. "I understand," she said, her voice measured, "and I'm ready to provide any necessary documentation." She placed the carefully organized stack of papers on the coffee table between them. The documents were her defense, her shield, her proof. As the investigator leafed through them, Elaine remained quiet, watching him with calm eyes. The silence was thick, almost oppressive. She could hear the wind picking up outside, the low howl of it pressing against the windows, but she didn't flinch. The storm was moving past them, leaving the house still and waiting. The storm outside was nothing compared to what she had already weathered. The investigator stopped flipping through the papers and looked up at her, his expression unchanged. "You're very thorough, Mrs. Carter. Every form is in order. The statements from the hospital are consistent. The documentation impeccable." Elaine felt the smallest shift of relief, but she didn't let it show. She had been prepared for this. She was confident in her actions, in her choices. He cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "It's clear that you've made informed decisions, Mrs. Carter. The nurse's statements confirm that you never consented to the DNR form. You've done everything properly." Elaine's chest tightened in a mixture of quiet pride and the last vestiges of her old anxiety. For the first time in a long while, she felt the validation of all her decisions falling into place. The investigator leaned back slightly, setting the folder down on the table, now closed. "I've completed my evaluation, Mrs. Carter. From everything I've reviewed, there's no concern. You are fully competent. You understand your decisions, and they are your own." Elaine let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The final step was done. The uncertainty that had lingered for so long was finally gone. Her right to make choices, her control over her own life, had been officially recognized. The investigator stood, offering her a polite nod. "I'll submit my report, and you should expect a formal letter within the next few days. You'll be able to proceed with everything without further interference. Elaine stood too, her hands steady as she reached for the documents. Thank you, she said, her voice soft but firm. The investigator turned to leave, but Elaine's hand hovered over the stack of papers on the coffee table. Wait, she said, before he could reach the door. The investigator paused, glancing back at her. Elaine picked up the top sheet and held it out to him. There's one more thing. I need to finalize this. With that, she handed him the signed codicil she'd prepared earlier, a legal addendum to her will, sealing Laura's disinheritance permanently. It was the final act, the final symbol of Elaine's control. No more room for manipulation, no more questions about her choices. It was done. The investigator nodded, taking the paper without question. Understood. I'll ensure this is filed as well. As the door clicked shut behind him, Elaine stood alone in the room, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. The storm had passed. The fight was over. But as she glanced over the room, the quiet, the stillness, Elaine knew the peace she'd worked so hard to achieve was hers now. No one could take it from her. Not Laura. Not anyone. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced down to see a message from Monica. Elaine, it's done. The codicil is final. Your future is yours to write. Elaine smiled, the weight of everything she had fought for finally settling into place. She walked to the window, the snow falling softly outside, a calm peace settling over her. She could feel the quiet, the stillness of everything she had earned. And this time, it was her peace. It's mine now. The small brass desk clock ticked steadily on the mantel, its rhythmic pulse a quiet companion to the silence that filled the house. Elaine stood in the living room, staring at it for a long moment, the steady movement of the second hand somehow grounding her. She had bought it that morning, in a small shop on the corner of the street, its polished surface reflecting a quiet elegance. The brass was warm, comforting, and it felt like the perfect symbol for this new phase of her life. Her fingers brushed against it now, feeling the cool metal beneath her fingertips. It was a small object, inconspicuous even, but to Elaine, it represented something much bigger. Stability, time, control. She had spent so long fighting for control, for the right to make decisions for herself. And now, as the clock ticked on, she finally felt as though she had won that battle. No one could take this from her. Not Laura. Not anyone. She had claimed her peace. And now, she would savor it. The doorbell rang, breaking the quiet. But this time, there was no tension in her chest, no feeling of dread. Elaine had learned to expect the unexpected, to live in the present without fearing what was to come. She was different now, stronger, more centered. She opened the door without hesitation, meeting the gaze of the woman standing on her porch. Elaine Carter? The woman asked, her voice soft but warm. Yes, Elaine replied, stepping aside. Come in. The woman introduced herself as a representative of the senior book club that met once a week at the community center. They were recruiting new members, she explained, and had heard that Elaine had expressed interest in joining. Elaine smiled, surprised to find herself in the position of being sought out rather than seeking something. She hadn't expected to feel this sense of belonging so soon after everything had happened, but here she was, extending a hand towards something new. I'd love to join, Elaine said, her voice calm, but there was a quiet excitement behind it. It had been years since she'd allowed herself to be part of a group, to engage in something for the sheer pleasure of it. But this felt right. This was hers to enjoy, without the weight of expectation, without the intrusion of others. As the woman left, Elaine felt something shift in her, a lightness, like the first breath of spring after a long, cold winter. She had made the choice to step forward into this next chapter. and she was ready for it. Weeks passed, and Elaine found herself in a new routine. She joined the book club, met with the other members, and began enjoying the simplicity of conversation, the joy of shared stories. The group was small, mostly women in their 70s and 80s, but their bond felt immediate. For the first time in years, Elaine didn't feel like a burden, didn't feel like she was waiting for something to happen. She was simply living. Alongside the book club, she began gentle physical therapy. At first, it had been difficult to admit she needed it. Her body, her mind, all had felt out of sync after so many years of constant battle. But as she stretched and moved through the exercises, something shifted within her. The pain lessened. The tension eased. Her body, like her mind, was reclaiming its strength. She kept her life binder updated, a place where every decision, every piece of paper that mattered, was kept organized and in its place. But now she added something new. A series of letters for Riley. Simple things. Notes of love, thoughts about the future, stories of Elaine's own life she had never shared before. She had written one for Riley's birthday, and another for a quiet Sunday afternoon when she needed something to say. It wasn't much, but it was something that would outlast her. Something her granddaughter could hold on to long after she was gone. One afternoon, as the autumn sun poured through the living room windows, Gordon came over, a slow, deliberate knock on the door before he let himself in. Elaine smiled when she saw him, a familiar comfort. He had become more than just a neighbor. He had become her confidant, her steady presence in a world that had once felt completely unpredictable. "You seem lighter, Elaine," Gordon said, stepping into the room. His voice was warm, as though he had noticed the change in her before she had even realized it herself. Elaine took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the space around her. The bookshelves, the soft couches, the view of the yard where the trees swayed gently in the breeze. This was her world now, her sanctuary. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. "I've reclaimed everything, Gordon," she said softly, her voice steady. "Everything I lost, everything that was taken from me. It's mine again." Gordon smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening with the sincerity of his words. "I'm glad, Elaine. You've earned it." Elaine's gaze lingered on the clock on the mantel. Its steady ticking filled the space between them, a reminder of time's passing and her ability to take control of it. For the first time in a long time, Elaine felt a peace she had never thought possible. Her life, her choices, her time, everything was finally hers. And in that quiet moment, as the sun dipped lower and the room filled with golden light, she realized that the real victory had never been about reclaiming control over her past. It had always been about embracing the future, about allowing herself to live it fully. She had everything she needed. The storm was over. The ballroom buzzed with excitement, a hum of voices that filled the air with a sense of celebration. But to Elaine, it was just background noise. She stood by the door, her fingers lightly touching the edges of her dress as she surveyed the crowd. Riley's event, an art exhibition showcasing the young artist's recent work, was a milestone, a moment of joy that Elaine had been looking forward to. But even in this moment of pride, she felt the weight of the final decision she had made, the one she had carried with her for weeks. Riley spotted her almost immediately, her face lighting up as she made her way through the crowd, her eyes bright with excitement. The event was important to Riley, and Elaine could see the pride in her granddaughter's movements, the way she carried herself as though everything was right with the world. It was a beautiful moment, but Elaine couldn't shake the knowing feeling that lingered in the back of her mind, the one that told her the real story of the night hadn't even begun. "Grandma," Riley said, her voice bright and warm as she wrapped her arms around Elaine. "I'm so glad you're here. This means so much to me." Elaine held her tight, feeling the gentle press of Riley's arms around her, her heartbeat steady. calm. "You've done a beautiful job, sweetheart," Elaine said, her voice full of pride. "I'm so proud of you." But as they pulled apart, Elaine caught sight of something, or rather, someone, just beyond Riley. Tom and Laura had arrived, standing awkwardly at the edge of the crowd, their expressions unreadable. For a moment it seemed as though time slowed, the room's noise fading to a dull roar. She could feel the tension, the unspoken history between them, stretching thin across the room. And then, as though on cue, Monica appeared by Elaine's side. Her presence was immediate, unwavering. She was calm, confident, her binder in hand. Elaine's eyes met Monica's, and she nodded once, quietly, resolutely. Laura's eyes darted toward them, but it wasn't just her gaze that locked onto Elaine. It was the presence of the attorney, the weight of the legal binder, the papers Elaine had signed, the documents that had shifted everything. She saw Laura's gaze freeze, her entire body going rigid, as though she could feel the walls closing in. Monica stepped forward, smooth and deliberate, positioning herself beside Elaine, the binder never leaving her side. Elaine watched Laura's face shift, her expression morphing from confusion to something more dangerous: anger, frustration, realization. And in that moment, everything became clear. Elaine stood taller, more confident now. Her voice was steady when she spoke, quiet but full of weight. "It's done, Laura. I've taken back control." Laura's lips trembled, her hands balled into fists at her sides. Tom looked between them, his eyes wide, his hand unconsciously reaching out toward his wife, but even he seemed to know this moment had long since passed beyond his reach. Elaine turned her attention to the papers in Monica's hand, feeling the cool weight of the final trust packet as she took it from the attorney. There was no hesitation now, no second guessing. She had already made this decision, and this was the moment she would seal it, once and for all. With a smooth motion, Elaine signed her name, the pen flowing over the page in a steady, deliberate arc. She knew what this meant. This wasn't just a signature. It was the end of the road for everything Laura had tried to claim: the DNR, the will, the assets. All of it was now firmly in her control, no longer up for negotiation. As the final stroke of ink settled onto the paper, Elaine looked up and met Laura's gaze directly. There was no longer any hint of uncertainty in her, only clarity. Laura's eyes widened as she realized the truth. Her name was gone from every page. Every document that had once linked her to Elaine's life was now erased, replaced by the names that mattered: Riley, Gordon, the charitable trust that Elaine had built in her own name. The legacy she would leave behind would be hers and no one else's. A silence settled over the room, heavy and suffocating. Laura's breath caught in her throat, her lips trembling as the realization hit her. "You." Laura's voice was barely a whisper, cracking under the weight of what she had lost. "You can't do this." But Elaine remained unshaken. She wasn't angry. She wasn't upset. She was simply done. Riley, who had been standing quietly at her side, stepped closer, wrapping her arms around Elaine in a tight hug. "Grandma," Riley whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "you did the right thing." Elaine hugged her back, holding her granddaughter tightly as the room seemed to blur around them. She had done the right thing. She had taken back everything that had been stripped from her. And now, in this quiet, simple moment, it felt like the only thing that mattered. Laura and Tom stood in the background, frozen in place, their eyes flickering with the weight of the finality Elaine had created. There was no turning back now. Elaine's feet were steady as she turned toward the exit, her heart calm, her mind clear. She had won. The storm that had once raged in her life, the chaos that had threatened to take everything, was over. She walked out of the ballroom, calm and steady, restored in every way that mattered. Final line. She tried to control my last breath. So I controlled everything she ever hoped to inherit.